A number of Middle Eastern countries have been working for years to diversify their energy sources, including pursuing the nuclear option. Iran, the first country in the region to develop nuclear power, is being followed by others. Turkiye has already begun construction on its first plant, with Saudi Arabia close to starting its own civilian program. But it was the UAE that took the title of the region's newest nuclear energy power. The fourth reactor of Abu Dhabi's Barakah nuclear energy plant has entered commercial operation, marking the completion of the Arab world's first such power station. The South Korean-built plant is set to produce a quarter of the Gulf nation's electricity needs. The UAE, long dependent on oil exports to fund its booming economy, is looking to develop enough renewable energy to cover half of its needs by 2050. But will the plant's opening spark a nuclear energy race throughout the region? And to discuss the Arab world's first nuclear power plant, joining me from London is political analyst and journalist Jonathan Fenton Harvey. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. Why would the UAE, an energy-rich country with a relatively small population, need to build a nuclear plant in the first place?
Despite having a small population, the UAE has been a wealthy country in the region, and that's largely to do with its large oil and gas reserves. So at a time we're talking about diversification and moving away from fossil fuels, there's pressure on countries like the UAE to explore different avenues of revenue. So one of the main advantages of moving towards nuclear power for the UAE is that it's considered a form of diversification. It's energy supplies, and nuclear power particularly is seen as a more cost-effective and secure source of energy. So that's one of the main reasons it would look at that. But at the same time, the UAE's tried to play a larger global role at the same time and promote its image internationally. So to say that it's the first country in the Middle East to have a nuclear power plant is quite a strong message to send to the world that the UAE is moving forward and it boosts its soft power in a way.
So the plant will produce 40 terawatt hours of electricity annually after its final reactor enters commercial operation. Is this a big energy gain for the oil-rich nation?
I would still say, compared to this gain, while it is impressive, especially as it is the first nuclear plant in the region to produce that much, which is relatively a lot, I would still say, compared to what it relies on in oil, this is still sort of a minor amount. It was, even if it will continue to focus on other diversification methods, I think oil would still be a key source of revenues for it, even though the UAE has relatively diversified a lot more. So going forward, this is a boost, and it sort of signals the UAE's ambitions as a partner that's trying to diversify. But at the same time, there's still more steps that would need to be taken if it were to diversify.
So you've mentioned diversification, but what is the long-term thinking of oil-rich nations in acquiring nuclear power?
It can depend on the specific nation. I mean, Saudi Arabia has pursued its own nuclear ambitions as well. It's yet to establish a significant plant in the way that the UAE has, but about a year ago today, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, announced his ambitions to make Saudi Arabia nuclear power. So on the one hand, there is the sense of creating a strong national image, but at the same time, there's also security reasons as well. Mohammed bin Salman quite rightly stated that if Iran were to acquire a nuclear weapon, then Saudi Arabia would be to acquire one as well. So that's sort of the distinction between creating nuclear power for internal uses for energy and then to actually weaponize it in a way which Saudi Arabia has signaled it may wish to drift towards and explore.
Yes, but how do you think Iran be responding to the news that its neighbor, the United Arab Emirates, is the second country to acquire nuclear power technology?
I think at this point, the UAE hasn't expressed any wishes to explore any sort of weaponization of it. It's more to do with its diversification ambitions and to ensure that it can have a wide range of different sources of revenue. So one of the benefits of that for the UAE is that it can have another source of energy. I think from Iran's perspective, it wouldn't necessarily fear that as much, especially as the UAE, like Saudi Arabia as well, actually, is focused on its economic interests rather than confrontation with another regional power. So for that reason, and also the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, have been on a de-escalation path with Iran. So I think there is a subtle message between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, but there is no desire for a confrontation in that sense.
But how would Israel react to a region with multiple nuclear power plants, including, as we've mentioned, Iran and possibly Saudi Arabia?
And this is the interesting point. Traditionally, I would have said Israel would have been more skeptical of that. But at the same time, since the United Arab Emirates has normalized relations with Israel, it was just over 4 years ago today that it did so with the Abraham Accords. And there are talks of Israel normalizing with Saudi Arabia, with fears that would be minimized, especially if the United States, Israel's greatest partner or ally, manages to broker these agreements. That would reassure Israel in a sense. Plus, given the tensions between Israel and Iran, they've evolved from their traditional sort of Cold War, and has been considered a greater risk of escalation. I think Israel would see Iran as a greater partner. So if there were more partners in the region who could be on board with Israel and align against Iran, that would make Israel happy or less concerned about the Arab Gulf states.
So UAE's Barakah nuclear power plant was constructed by South Korea. What does this tell us about the shape of both countries' relations? And is there a competition brewing between China, South Korea, and Russia when it comes to building nuclear power plants abroad?
I say traditionally that South Korea has been a smaller player in this, especially compared to China, but as a rapidly growing economy with a lot of technological expertise with its technology companies, that's made it more desirable for countries, particularly like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, but especially the UAE, but don't want to get caught up between this sort of bipolar Cold War between the United States and China. It would want to explore more partners in that sense. Now, South Korea's traditionally has a lot of technological expertise. I mean, for instance, an interesting point is that it's helped construct Dubai's Burj Khalifa, the tallest tower in the world. So that's made it more appealing to the UAE in that sense. But at the same time, it has more to offer now, especially in constructing nuclear power. And that's helped the UAE get ahead in that sense. And there's more to that partnership as well, especially since South Korea is aiming to export more weapons to the Gulf region, sees it as an important partner in that sense.
So Turkiye also targets all 4 reactors of the country's first nuclear power plant to be ready for operation by 2028. How significant is this? And will their operations help the country to diversify its energy supplies and maybe to become an energy supplier in the future?
Yes, I would say these steps from Turkey show that it is forward thinking as well, in the sense that many Gulf states are trying to diversify and look more towards different sources of energy. And that would definitely be a boost to Turkey's economy. And at the same time, like many countries in the world now, Turkey has shown that it is able to balance between different countries and diversify its partnerships more. So that would certainly be a boost towards Turkey's nuclear ambitions, which, like you said, would advance significantly in the coming decade. So that sort of signifies more of a sort of world order we're in now, where it's a multipolar world order. More countries are offering different partnerships to various countries around the world.
So is building nuclear power plants a part of the global net zero emissions drive, or does it signal to a nuclear power race in different parts of the world?
I would say the primary point is that there is pressure to move away from fossil fuels at the same time. So that's a different factor. So obviously one of the key points as well, particularly in the Gulf region and Europe and elsewhere, is there's a push towards green energy as well. For instance, there's been a push within Saudi Arabia and the UAE to move towards solar energy. Both of them are constructing significant solar energy plants as well at the same time. to either export it to countries which want to diversify their
So,
energy sources as well.
so overall, is the nuclear energy race heating up in the Middle East, and where is this headed?
I would say going forward for now, the main concern for many powers in the region is that they can diversify their energy sources more. So if Saudi Arabia is able to acquire more nuclear power, it would rely on the US to do so. So one of the key stipulations of that would be Saudi Arabia may normalize ties with Israel. That was on the table about a year ago before the war on Gaza broke out. So I think what we could see more is Saudi Arabia would rely on the US to broker that. But there's still an uncertain point at this time, because if Saudi Arabia did acquire nuclear energy, that could concern Iran more. So even though the fragile de-escalation we have made in the past few years, since 2020, could see more of disruptions if that were to take place.
All right, Jonathan, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Aisha Barakah. If you've got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.